The fire took everything. Mabel Rourke had been dreaming of horses when the smoke clawed into her lungs. She woke choking, flames licking up the walls of the barn, turning beams into splinters of burning orange. Her father's shouts came next, low and guttural, somewhere in the smoke. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight into it. She found him under a collapsed rafter, blood running down his face, pinned like a broken bird. He tried to speak, but all she could hear was crackling wood and her own heartbeat. She pulled with everything she had, arms shaking, coughing so hard she thought her ribs might break. And somehow, God knows how, she dragged him out into the cold night. He didn't make it to dawn. The barn was gone. Her father too. And her face, half of it, melted under the fury of the fire that had swallowed their lives whole. They said the blaze was an accident. They said it started from a lantern left too close to the hay. But Mabel remembered every night of her life in that barn, and her father never once left a lantern burning. Still no one asked questions. Not when a man was dead and the only thing left standing was his daughter, her skin blistered and weeping, her beauty charred away in a single night. They buried her father on a windy hilltop above Ash Hollow. Her mother followed him 3 months later, eaten from the inside by sickness and sorrow. After that, Mabel was alone. Alone in a town that couldn't look at her without flinching. Ash Hollow was not a kind place. Nestled between dry hills and rattlesnake country, it stank of sweat, whiskey, and horses. Its people spoke in whispers and stares. Children stopped their games when she passed. Their mothers tugged them aside. Men averted their eyes. Women crossed themselves. She had once been known here. Not loved, not cherished, but known. The daughter of Angus Rourke, the best horsebreaker this side of the divide. She could ride bareback, braid reins, and shoot tin cans off a fence post. There was even a time when she was considered pretty. That time was gone. Now, she walked with her face turned to shadow, wearing a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and a scarf wrapped around her jaw despite the summer heat. It didn't help. Folks still whispered. Scorch-face they called her. Devil's bride. Some said she brought the fire herself. That she'd been too proud, too wild. That God had punished her. She worked where she could. Mostly the saloon, cleaning spit off the floor, scrubbing blood off tables after card games turned mean. She stayed in a shack near the old railroad tracks, just far enough out of town that no one had to see her unless they needed something cleaned. Her only companion was a mule named Clover, older than sin and just as stubborn. Clover didn't mind her scars. She chewed her oats, farted loudly, and followed Mabel around like a dog. On days when Mabel couldn't face the town, she sat outside with Clover and told stories to the sky. She spoke less and less as weeks turned into months. There was no one to talk to. The world had narrowed to 2 things: survival and silence. Then came the preacher. He arrived in a wagon covered in scripture, his wife clinging to his elbow like he might drift off into sin if she let go. He preached fire and brimstone from a crate outside the saloon every Sunday morning. People listened. They liked his voice. He told them they were chosen, that their struggles made them pure, that the wicked wore their sins on their skin. He never named her, but his eyes always found Mabel in the crowd. And that was enough. That week, she came to the market square to buy oats for Clover. She had just paid when something wet and soft slapped against her cheek. A rotten peach, overripe and buzzing with flies. The boys who'd thrown it laughed and ran. The shopkeeper looked away. Mabel didn't say a word. She picked up the peach, held it in her scarred hand, and stared at it a long while. Then she dropped it on the ground, stepped over it, and walked away. That night, her employer at the saloon, Miss Ida, called her upstairs. "I'm getting complaints," she said, not looking up from her ledger. "Men come to the saloon to forget their troubles, not stare at 'em walking around." "I stay out of the way," Mabel replied, voice steady. Miss Ida finally looked at her, lips pressed thin. "Maybe you do, but you're still in the room. I can't afford to lose patrons." Mabel wanted to argue. She wanted to scream. Instead, she nodded. "I'll work the back. Storage supplies. No one'll see me." Miss Ida sighed. That'd be best. So she worked in shadows. But even shadows weren't safe. It was late. The saloon was closing. Mabel had just emptied a spittoon when she stepped out back into the alley. The moon was high, silver, and merciless. 2 shapes blocked the exit. Roy and Thad, drunk, cruel, and looking for something to break. "Well, look what crawled out," Roy slurred, grinning. "Heard the devil's mistress was hiding back here. Think she still bleeds like the rest of us?" Thad asked, eyes mean. Mabel didn't answer. She reached for the knife she kept strapped to her boot, hand moving slow and careful. "Ah, don't be like that," Roy said, stepping closer. We just want to talk. Maybe get a look at what's left under that scarf. He reached out. The blade was in her hand before he touched her, gleaming in the moonlight. Her eyes were wild, ferocious. She didn't speak, didn't flinch. And neither did they, because a voice broke the night like thunder. Back off, boys. It was calm, deep. A voice that didn't beg or threaten. It promised. The two men froze. From the edge of the alley, a figure stepped into view. Tall, straight-back, dust-covered duster coat, black hat. A gray horse behind him, reins hanging loose. The stranger's eyes were clouded, pale like frost, blind. Roy turned. Who the hell were you? Someone you don't want to test, the man replied. Thad laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. You can't even see us, old man. I don't need to see you, the cowboy said. I can smell fear just fine. Mabel didn't breathe. The knife stayed raised. Roy hesitated. Then Thad lunged, fast and sloppy. The stranger moved faster. He pivoted, brought his fist around with the weight of a mountain. Thad went down like a sack of flour. Roy backed up, hands raised, eyes wide. This ain't over, he muttered. The cowboy tilted his head. It is for now. Roy bolted into the dark, leaving his friend groaning on the ground. Silence returned. Mabel lowered her knife. Her hand was shaking. The stranger turned toward her. You all right? He asked. She nodded slowly, unsure if she trusted her voice. Name's Elias Boone, he said. You got a name? Mabel, she said after a moment. He nodded. Folks around here always that friendly? She let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Only when they're drunk. Elias stepped back, hands relaxed. Well, I don't mean to crowd you. Just didn't sit right watching that unfold. You couldn't see it. Didn't need to. She studied him. He didn't flinch. Didn't stare at her scars. Maybe he really couldn't see. Maybe that's why he didn't look away. I can handle myself, she said. He smiled faintly. I know. But even the strong get tired. She didn't answer. He turned to leave, hand brushing his horse's mane. If you ever need a friend, I'm renting the barn up near the old ridge. Just me and whiskey here. She blinked. The barn still standing? He shrugged. For now. Then he mounted and rode off, disappearing into the dark like some story made of dust and silence. Mabel stood there for a long time, the knife still in her hand, the moon turning her breath to silver. She didn't know why he'd helped. Didn't know what he wanted. But she'd seen something in him, something quiet and worn and real. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely invisible. She still had her scars. The town still hated her. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in the world anymore. And that, somehow, was enough to make her want to see what tomorrow would bring. The next morning came with wind and dust as it always did in Ash Hollow. The town yawned to life slowly, doors creaked open, shutters clattered in the breeze, and the same sour smell of horse, tobacco, and regret settled over the streets like a second skin. Mabel kept her scarf tied tight. She walked into town with her head low, a burlap sack slung over her shoulder. Her steps were slow but deliberate, the ache in her leg a fresh reminder of the scuffle the night before. She didn't limp. Limping invited attention. Pity. Or worse. The general store was half empty when she walked in. Mr. Tiller barely looked up from his ledger. Soap, she muttered, placing a coin on the counter. He grunted. Back shelf. She turned, making her way past barrels of nails, sacks of flour, and shelves that always looked more full than they actually were. Everything in Ash Hollow was an illusion. Prosperity, decency, kindness. Scratch the surface and it bled rust. She was halfway back when the door creaked open again. Boots thudded across the floor. Not loud. Measured. Familiar. She didn't have to turn. She knew the rhythm of those steps already. You trail folks like a shadow? She asked, not looking over her shoulder. Elias Boone chuckled softly. Didn't know you owned the store. Don't, she replied. But I'm not used to being followed. I'm not following you. I'm buying oats. She turned then, slowly. His hat was low over his brow, his stance relaxed. He leaned slightly on a crooked walking stick, oak, sanded smooth. He looked comfortable. At ease. Like he belonged, even if the world around him didn't seem to agree. You ride a horse named Whiskey, she said. He smiled. Best judge of character I ever knew. Tiller cleared his throat behind the counter. You buyin' or visitin', Boone? Oats, Elias said, reaching into his coat. The transaction was swift. Tiller bagged the feed without another word. Mabel stepped past Elias on her way out, brushing close. Not by accident. She paused just long enough to say, "Don't think rescuing me means you get to keep an eye on me." He nodded once. "Wasn't my intention." She started walking. He followed, at a distance. She knew he wasn't trailing her, not really. But his presence lingered, like the memory of music after the piano stopped playing. "Why'd you come to Ash Hollow?" she asked without turning. "Looking for quiet," Elias said. "Turns out I'm bad at finding it." She stopped at the watering trough outside the saloon. Clover was tied nearby, her muzzle deep in the trough, snorting and splashing. Mabel leaned on the hitching post. "A blind man looking for quiet in a town like this? Doesn't add up." He shrugged. "Sometimes I go places where no one expects anything of me. It's a funny thing. People look at you and make decisions. About your worth, your danger, your soul." Her eyes met his. "And what do they see when they look at me?" "Depends who they are," he said. "But I don't look." She studied him. There was no pity in his face. No edge of fear or discomfort. Just a steady calm. "Town won't take to you if you keep defending me," she warned. "I'm not here for the town." Something about the way he said it, like truth hammered flat and sharp, caught in her chest. She nodded once. "I got work." "I know," he said, tipping his hat. "Just wanted to see if you were all right." That night she couldn't sleep. The air was too still. The stars too bright. Memories clawed at her like they always did. Smoke, heat, the sound of her father's voice fading into crackling flame. She rose before dawn and walked to the ridge. The barn Elias had spoken of stood weathered and graying. Half its shingles gone. One door hanging crooked. But it held together. He was already there, seated on a stool just outside the doorway, tuning a battered old guitar. The strings were worn and the wood had seen better days, but the sound it made was sweet, gentle, almost sad. "You're up early," he said without looking. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded, strumming softly. "That makes two of us." She stepped closer. The land stretched wide behind him, dry hills rolling into purple mountains, dust devils swirling far in the distance. The sun hadn't broken yet, but the sky glowed silver and pink. "Did you used to play?" she asked. "My brother taught me. Long time ago." "You have family?" "Had," he said. "Lost him same year I lost my sight." She didn't press. Grief was something sacred out here, like water. You didn't ask for more than what someone was willing to give. He set the guitar aside. "I heard your father's name before I ever came through Ash Hollow. Said he could break any stallion in under a week." "He could," she replied. "Taught me most of what I know." "I could tell." She raised a brow. "How?" He smiled faintly. "The way you walk. Like someone who knows how to ride. Someone who's been thrown but got back on." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustling of grass and the distant whinny of whiskey. "Why'd you help me?" she asked finally. "That night in the alley." He tilted his head. "Because someone needed help." "That simple?" "It can be. No one else sees it that way. Then maybe they've been looking too long in the wrong direction." She sat on the barn steps beside him. The wood was rough beneath her palms. "You really blind?" she asked. "Completely. And yet you can still swing a fist like you see just fine." He chuckled. "You learn to listen to breath. To footsteps. To hesitation." She didn't respond, and the quiet sat between them, not awkward but worn in, like boots that had walked too far together. After a while she stood. "I should go." Elias rose too. "Be careful in town." "I'm always careful." As she turned to leave, he said, "You ever consider leaving this place?" She paused. "Every day." "Then why haven't you?" She didn't answer. She just walked back into the rising sun, her shadow stretching long behind her. The week passed and things changed, slowly, subtly. People still whispered. Still looked away. But Elias Boone had a presence that couldn't be ignored. He played at the saloon on slow nights, his voice rough and low, his fingers coaxing soft, mournful notes from that old guitar. Folks came to listen. Not many but enough. Some even tipped their hats to Mabel now. Not kindly. But not cruelly either. It was something. Then one evening, as the sky turned the color of rust, Sheriff Lyle came knocking. He was a big man with eyes like granite and a badge that gleamed too bright. Mabel didn't trust him. No one with clean boots in Ash Hollow could be trusted. "Boone," he said, standing outside the barn. "Word is you've been stirring up trouble." Elias stood from where he'd been sharpening a blade. "Trouble finds its own way. You put Roy Dawson in the dirt last week. Didn't know standing up for a woman counted as a crime." Lyle's gaze flicked to Mabel, who stood in the barn doorway. She don't need a hero, Lyle said. Elias smiled without humor. She's not the one who needed saving that night. The sheriff didn't like that. His jaw clenched. You keep poking around, Boone, you'll find this town has a way of biting back. Elias stepped forward. Come, Colt. And if it does, Sheriff, I bite harder. Lyle stared for a long beat, then turned and left. Mabel exhaled. That was a mistake. Maybe, Elias said. But it was the right one. Later, she sat beside him again under the stars. No words. Just the sound of wind and crickets. And something else, something new. She was no longer invisible. But that meant being seen. And being seen meant being in danger. For the first time in a long while, Mabel felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Something was coming. And this time she wasn't sure if she'd be the one walking away. The storm rolled in from the west with low thunder and dust hanging thick like a curse. Mabel could feel it in her bones before it even touched the ridge, a pressure behind her eyes, a familiar ache in the scar that ran down her cheek. Change always came with a warning. The skies never lied. By mid-morning, the town was quieter than usual. Shop windows were shuttered, doors pulled tight. Even the saloon, normally buzzing with half-drunk card players and dry laughter, had grown still as though the air itself had paused to listen. Trouble was coming, and folks had started bracing for it without saying a word. Elias stood outside the livery stable, tying Whiskey's reins to the post. He'd traded his usual relaxed posture for something stiffer, more alert. His head tilted slightly as he listened, not to sound but to silence. They're watching, he said low, almost to himself. Mabel leaned against the rail nearby. They always watch. That's how they keep control. Eyes behind curtains. Judgments through shutters. He nodded. But this is different. She didn't ask how he knew. She'd stopped doubting his instincts. Some people had eyes in their heads. Others had eyes in their blood. That afternoon she saddled Clover without knowing why. Just a pull in her chest, a sense that her feet wouldn't be safe on the ground much longer. You planning on going somewhere? Elias asked, appearing beside her like a ghost. Not yet. But I want to be ready if I need to. He traced a finger along Clover's bridle. The wind smells like smoke. She looked up. I don't smell it. You will. A sharp whistle cut the air then, urgent and short. A boy ran down the hill from the direction of the Dawson ranch, his face flushed and panicked. They're coming, he shouted. All of M. Roy's brothers and 2 more from Canyon Fork. Armed. Mabel's heart didn't race. It slowed. Like the world was pressing pause, waiting for her to decide something important. Elias didn't move. How many? 6, maybe more. They've got rifles. She turned to him. You still want to stay? I didn't come here to run, he said. She swallowed hard. Then we stand. The saloon emptied fast. Sheriff Lyle didn't show his face. Probably cowering in the back room, counting bullets and deciding how many he was willing to use for someone like her. The answer she already knew was none. The townsfolk didn't offer help either. Some closed their windows. Others just watched. But 1 or 2 lingered. Mrs. Hargreaves, the baker's widow, slipped Mabel a small pistol wrapped in cloth. It jams sometimes, she muttered. But it's better than a curse and a prayer. Elias stood in the middle of the main street, his cane in one hand, his other resting lightly on his belt. His coat fluttered in the rising wind, and his hat sat low over his face like a shadow drawn in ink. Mabel joined him, rifle slung over her shoulder, heart steady now, breath even. She wasn't here to die. But she was no longer afraid of it either. The riders came in hard. Dust churned beneath their hooves, and the echo of galloping filled the street like war drums. 6 of them just like the boy said. Roy's brother, Caleb, led the pack, a wide-shouldered brute with a jagged scar down one arm and a hate that could light fires just by looking. They pulled up in a half-circle, weapons drawn. You picked the wrong side, blind man, Caleb called. Elias smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. Didn't know decency had sides. You got one chance, Caleb barked. Step away from the freak. This don't concern you. Mabel stepped forward then, raising her voice above the wind. You're wrong. It concerns everyone who ever stood silent when someone got hurt. It concerns cowards. It concerns every man who thinks a face is reason enough to ruin a life. Caleb sneered. You think you can scare us with words? No, Elias said low and even. But she's not the one you should be afraid of. With that he moved, fast. Faster than anyone expected. His cane swept out, catching one rider's horse at the knee. The animal reared and the man fell, crashing to the ground with a howl. Mabel was already moving too. She ducked behind a barrel, raised the rifle and fired. One shot. The man closest to Caleb dropped his gun, screaming as blood poured from his shoulder. The street exploded in chaos. Gunshots cracked. Hoofs pounded. Smoke filled the air. Elias moved like he'd trained for this moment all his life. Every step calculated, every swing of his cane deadly. He disarmed one man, knocked another flat, never losing his footing. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Mabel fired again, clipped another rider. Her shoulder burned from the recoil, but she held her ground. Then Caleb raised his rifle, aimed straight at Elias. "No!" she shouted, too far to reach him in time. The shot rang out, and Elias staggered. Blood bloomed on his sleeve. Mabel screamed, fired again, and the bullet struck Caleb square in the chest. He dropped like a stone, dust rising around his body like smoke from a funeral pyre. The other riders hesitated, saw their leader fall, and scattered. One tried to shoot her as he retreated, but his bullet missed wide and clipped the church bell instead. The clang echoed through the empty street. Silence followed. Mabel ran to Elias. He was still upright, though just barely, leaning heavy on the cane now stained red. "Let me see," she said, reaching for his arm. He winced but nodded. The wound was bad but not deadly. A graze through the muscle. He'd live. But the pain would last. "You didn't have to stand with me," she whispered. "I did," he replied, voice tight with pain. "Because I saw you. Even before I met you." She helped him toward the saloon. Someone finally came out. Doc Havers, coat half buttoned, face pale. Others emerged too. Not many but a few. People who had watched and done nothing. Now they looked ashamed. They'd seen something that didn't fit their stories. Burned girl, blind man, broken people who refused to stay down. Inside the saloon, Mabel helped Elias to a chair while the doc worked. "You'll need to rest that arm," the old man muttered. "I rest when I'm dead," Elias replied. Doc snorted, cleaning the wound. Stubborn fool. Later, after the bandages were wrapped tight and whiskey had been calmed, Mabel sat beside Elias at the bar. The piano was silent. The bartender gone. Only the wind outside remained, tugging at the broken sign above the door. "Why did you come to Ash Hollow really?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I thought maybe I could find someone who knew what it meant to survive." She stared at him. "You found them." "I did," he said, turning his head toward her. "But I didn't expect to fall in love with them." Her breath caught. He couldn't see the tears that sprang to her eyes, but maybe he felt them. His hand found hers on the table, warm and steady. "I'm not easy," she whispered. "I've got ghosts and anger and this face." "I don't need easy," he said. "I just need real." She let the silence stretch, thick with meaning. Then she squeezed his hand. "Then stay." "I will," he said. "As long as you want me to." The storm outside began to break. Rain tapped the roof gently, and for once, it didn't sound like the end of something. It sounded like a beginning. 3 days after the fight, Ash Hollow began to shift. Not by much, not enough to count as redemption, but enough to change the air. Enough to make the silence that had followed Mabel her whole life feel just a little less hollow. Folks still stared, but the looks weren't as sharp, not as bitter. No one spat in her direction. No one muttered curses beneath their breath when she passed. They didn't smile either. But they didn't turn away. Sometimes survival is its own kind of justice. Elias healed slowly. The wound in his arm was angry and deep, but he bore it without complaint. Mabel took to checking on him twice a day, bringing clean cloths and boiled water, scolding him when he tried to do too much too fast. "You're the most stubborn patient I've ever seen," she said one morning, kneeling beside him as he tried, again, to saddle whiskey with one hand. "I'm also the most handsome," he replied, grinning. She snorted. "You're blind, remember? Can't even verify that claim." "I don't need eyes to know I've got charm." She fought a smile and lost. By the end of the week he was walking stronger. The pain lingered, but his steps were steady again. He insisted on splitting firewood, despite the bandages, despite her protests. She let him, standing nearby just in case. "I'm not broken," he said once after catching her watching too closely. "I never said you were. You don't have to say it. You wear worry like a badge." She lowered her gaze. "I've buried too many people to pretend I'm not afraid." "I'm not going anywhere," he said soft. "Not without you." The words stayed with her, curling in her chest like warmth near a hearth. They scared her too. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she did. Then came the letter. It was handed to Mabel by Mrs. Hargreaves, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return mark. The handwriting was tight and angular, ink faded. Inside, a single sentence. He's coming for you. No name. No explanation. But Mabel knew. She sat on the porch that night long after Elias had gone to sleep. The stars above blinked cold and distant, and her scar itched beneath the moonlight. She'd hoped the past would stay buried beneath the ashes, but ghosts had a way of clawing out. The man who gave her that face, the man who set her family home on fire, who laughed while her world burned, had never been caught. The sheriff back then had called it a tragic accident. But Mabel remembered the kerosene, the smell, the voice. She never forgot the voice, and now it was coming back for her. When she told Elias the next morning, he didn't flinch, just listened. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to run," she admitted. "But I'm tired of running. Then we make a stand. He'll bring others. Then we'll bring each other." It wasn't a fair fight. It never was. But they'd both stopped believing in fairness a long time ago. They prepared in silence. Mabel checked the rifle, cleaned the pistol Mrs. Hargreaves had given her, reinforced the barn doors, laid tripwires with Elias along the property line. She spoke to no one in town. If they were willing to help, they would have said so by now. Elias worked in his own quiet way. He oiled his knife, practiced moving without sound, taught her how to fight dirty, how to duck low, aim for joints, listen for breath patterns. "People make noise when they lie," he told her, "but they make more when they're afraid." By the second night, the wind changed. It blew in from the north, sharp and dry. Elias stood on the porch beside her, his hand resting on the post. "He's close," he murmured. "How do you know?" "I can feel him in the air. Like rust on a blade." The attack came just before dawn. No warning. No shouts or threats. Just the scream of a bottle crashing against the barn, followed by flame. The roof lit fast. Someone had soaked it in oil while they slept. Mabel bolted from the house with a bucket, Elias behind her, already barking orders. "Don't fight the fire, block the door," he shouted. "They want to flush us out." She dropped the bucket, grabbed the rifle instead. Shapes moved in the early light, men 5 or 6, all armed. They fanned out through the trees surrounding the cabin. And there, near the edge of the fence line, stood a tall figure in a gray duster and wide-brimmed hat. Mabel froze. It was him. She didn't need to see his face to know. The way he moved, the way his shoulders leaned, lazy, confident, cruel. "Come out, sweetheart," he called. "Ain't no need for all this fuss. I just want what's owed." Elias stepped forward. "She owes you nothing." "Who the hell are you?" "Her future." Pause. Then laughter, low and slow. "You blind? I see more than you ever did. Then you should have stayed gone." The first shot rang out. Miss. Elias ducked behind the water trough. Mabel returned fire, striking one of the men in the leg. He howled and went down. Another rushed the porch. Elias swung the cane hard, caught the man under the chin. He dropped. The fire roared behind them, but Mabel didn't dare turn her back. More gunshots. Wood splintered. A bullet grazed her side. She hissed but didn't fall. 2 more men down. One retreated. Then he came forward. The man in gray. His eyes locked on hers. "Your daddy screamed like a pig," he said. She raised the rifle. Her hands trembled. "You burned," she whispered. "You burned everything I loved." "Should have died in that house," he said, pulling his revolver. He fired first. Too fast. But Elias was faster. He threw the cane. The wood struck the man's hand mid-shot. The bullet went wide. Mabel squeezed the trigger. The man jerked, staggered, dropped to one knee. But didn't fall. He laughed. Blood bubbled from his lips. "You think this is over?" he croaked. Elias stepped beside her. "It is for you." Together they fired. Twice. Then silence. Only the fire crackling. The dawn creeping up like nothing had happened. Mabel dropped to her knees. Her breath came in ragged sobs. Elias knelt beside her, one arm still bleeding, the other steady on her shoulder. "It's done?" he whispered. "No," she said, tears hot down her cheek. "It'll never be done. But you're free now. You can choose." She looked at him. Her hands still shook. Her face was damp. Her body ached. But she wasn't broken. Not this time. "I choose to live," she said. The town came out slowly that morning. The sheriff finally arrived, an hour late. He had nothing to say. But Mrs. Hargreaves did. So did Document. So did the boy who'd once run for help. They came with blankets, bread, warm words. Not apologies, but something close. Mabel buried the man in gray herself. No prayers. Just dirt. He didn't deserve words. That night, Elias sat on the porch with his guitar. The stars were brighter now. Mabel stood beside him, her scarf gone, her face bare to the moonlight. "People are looking at me," she said. "They'll get used to it. You think we'll ever leave this place? Maybe. But we don't have to run anymore." She nodded, then sat. And for the first time in years she felt the weight lift. The scar was still there. The pain still hummed beneath the skin. But so was the strength. So was the fire that hadn't killed her. Elias strummed a chord. The tune was quiet, unfinished, just like them. And still, beautiful.